Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. As a beginning knitter, one of the instructions that always tangled me up was bind off a certain number of stitches at the beginning of a row. Let's say 10 stitches, for example. I was unclear exactly what that should look like. I didn't know how to count the first two stitches that were knit, and I felt like I was doing it wrong because I ended up working past the 10th stitch on my needle. So today, as I'm working on my swaying palms shawl, I'd like to demonstrate how to count when you're binding off the first 10 stitches using a plain bind off. So you can see exactly where the bind off ends and knitting the rest of the row begins. I'll also show you how many stitches you should have left to work after you bind off those first 10 stitches. Let's get started. Before we begin, if you enjoy our videos, consider joining the pack and becoming a member of thechilidog.com for ad-free access to our entire learning library, priority support, and more. For this particular row, I'm starting with 130 stitches on my needle, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Since we'll be binding off 10 stitches, I've clipped a locking stitch marker here under the 10th stitch on my left-hand needle. Our first two stitches are going to be knit like normal. At this point, I still have not bound off any stitches. I'll bind off one by passing that first stitch up and over the second. As we continue, we'll count every time one stitch is passed over another. So I knit and then bind off stitch number 2. Knit and bind off 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 10. Now 10 stitches have been bound off. Here's what's important to notice. I've bound off 10 stitches and one stitch remains on my right-hand needle, and that stitch is directly above the 11th original stitch. Now, think about this. If I started out with 130 stitches and bound off 10, how many stitches do I need to knit for the rest of the row? Your first instinct might lead you to say 120 stitches. After all, 130 original stitches minus the 10 that I bound off is 120. But that doesn't account for the one stitch that's already here on my right-hand needle after the bind off is complete. The process of binding off gave me the 10 bound off stitches plus one stitch, the 11th stitch of the row, that has been worked and is here on my needle. 130 minus 11 is 119, and that's how many stitches remain on my left hand needle. I hope this lesson helped you understand exactly what happens mathematically when you bind off stitches at the beginning of a row. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your knitting friends. If you'd like to try this technique in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechilidog.com and look for the Swaying Palms shawl. Until we stitch again, happy knitting.